when I was planning this conference, I was like, all right, the first 2 sessions on Friday night are the hardest. What if the people come for that and they're like, we're done? So, didn't happen. Thanks for coming back. Anyways, if you're looking for a book on parenting, this is the gold standard. It's called Shepherding a Child's Heart. I did a class on this 2 summers ago, 3 summers ago. Anyways, it's phenomenal. That's the book I recommend always on parenting. So this conference is the gospel applied to marriage. That book is the gospel applied to parenting. So, really good book. So, all right, well, let's pray and begin. Father, just bless us now as we endeavor to understand the gospel in marriage. Help my words to be clear, and help us to apply this in our lives through your power. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's jump in. This session is love deeper than feelings. Ephesians 5:31. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Imagine a couple who's been caring for a little girl for a long time. They feed her, they tuck her in at night. They go to her school plays. She even calls them mom and dad. But when someone asks, are you going to adopt her? They shrug and say, we don't need a piece of paper to show that we love her. How about the person who says, I'll write you a check, but just don't ask me to sign it? Or the business partner who says, let's start a company together, pour in our money, build something amazing, but why do we need to get legal paperwork involved to show my commitment? It's just going to complicate things. Well, with all these examples, we realize that something is missing when it comes to that person's commitment level. Yet today, this is the mindset we see with marriage. People often say, well, why do we need to get married? Why do we need to have a piece of paper that just complicates things? Why do we need a piece of paper to show my love for that person? That's missing the point. The piece of paper doesn't create love, it seals it. Because love is not a feeling. What is love? It's a verb. It's a choice. Love is a deliberate commitment, as we saw last night, to work for the good of the other person. And the marriage covenant is a sealing of that commitment that goes well beyond mere emotions. When the Bible speaks of love, it doesn't measure it by how much you feel. It measures it by how much you're willing to give and sacrifice yourself for the other person. How much freedom you're willing to give up for the good of the other over your own self. How much precious time, emotion, and resources you're willing to invest in that person. And for that, the marriage vow isn't just helpful, it's really a test. It's a test. Because typically, when one person says to the other, I love you, but let's not ruin it or complicate it by getting married, they're really saying, I don't love you enough to close off my other options quite yet. They're saying, my love for you has not reached the marriage level. And people give all sorts of reasons for not doing this. It'll affect our finances, it'll complicate things, it'll mess up our insurance. I've heard numerous reasons for this. And in response, my response is 2 words. I just say, so what? Sacrifice yourself for the other, because that's what love is. It's sacrificing for the other. That's what true love is. Now, a lot of people wrongly think that the chief purpose of marriage is about romance, but it's not. It's about covenant. As the Bible shows us, the idea that marriage is about romance is not only fundamentally wrong, it's not what true love is. Now, it's not that it's wrong to want romance in your relationship. That's a good thing, because a good marriage will definitely have romance. But it's wrong to prioritize romance as the foundation of your marriage, because romance ebbs and flows. So yes, romance is a part of it, but marriage is about the good, as we saw last night, of everyone, the husband, the wife, the children, society. And the Bible shows that marriage perfectly unites passion and promise in a way that leads to blessing for all. So it's covenant, it's promise, but it's also romantic passion. The two go together. But the foundation is the promise. So today we don't hear that word covenant very much. It's not a common word. But in past times, it was a concept that people were very much familiar with. With a contract, it's like renting a house versus buying a house. Covenant versus contract, okay? It's renting versus buying. And the way it works with a contract when you're renting, as long as that apartment or that house serves your immediate needs, you'll stay in the renter's contract. But once it doesn't, or you find a better place to rent, what do? You move on to the better place to rent or live in. And sadly, a lot of people view marriage that way. They view it as a contract instead of a lifelong covenant that it truly is. Now, why do they do that? It's because they're looking at marriage through the lens of, what do I get out of this? How does it serve me? Instead of like a buyer who says, oh, that's a nice house, and yes, it has issues, and there's projects that's going to need to be done. It's going to have the basement finished. The upstairs kitchen will need some work. But that's a covenant approach versus a contract approach. And people in our culture don't view it that way. So the idea of covenant, this comes out of the book of Genesis. Right? This is where we first see covenant in the Bible. And in the first few chapters of Genesis, it speaks of marriage. Genesis 2:24 says this, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they shall become one flesh." In this passage, we find the first marriage ceremony, and it describes this as leaving and cleaving. The two come together, two become one. This is a Hebrew word that literally means to be glued to something. And it carries the idea of being united to someone in a binding promise or an unbreakable oath. That's why passages like Malachi 2:14 use this in regard to marriage. It says this, "But you say, why does he not? Because the Lord has witnessed between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant." Even though covenant is between one man and one woman, Proverbs 2:17 shows us that it's also a covenant made with a third party. Who's the third party the covenant of marriage is made with? Anybody know? It's with God. Proverbs 2:16 through 17 says, "So you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words, who forsake the companion of her youth and forgets the what? The covenant of her God." Here the Bible makes it clear that the person who breaks her covenantal vows in marriage is forgetting their covenant was ultimately made before God. It's no small thing. This is why so many traditional Christian weddings, they have the couple say something like this, "I take you to be my lawful and wedded husband, and I do promise and covenant before God and these witnesses to be your loving and faithful spouse, in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live." So again, that's a covenant made before God. And that's ultimately what marriage is. But our culture, we've moved very far away from this. Well, why? Well, as we've already discussed, it's because we believe it's going to restrict romantic intimacy. It's not going to enhance it. But that's actually completely backwards. A relationship actually becomes more intimate because it's a legal covenant. Think about this. When a couple is dating or living together, they have to constantly prove their value daily by impressing the other, by enticing the other person. They have to show the chemistry is still there and the contract is worth keeping. That's a consumer relationship, though, isn't it? What do you have for me? You have to keep up with my expectations, with my demands. But a relationship that is based on covenantal commitment, that creates a place for security where you can actually let your hair down and show your true colors, ugly as they might be sometimes. You can be vulnerable in that kind of a situation. You no longer have to keep up the facade in order to keep selling yourself on a regular basis. You can take the mask off and be completely naked, both physically and in every other way with that person. But in a consumer relationship, you don't get that. You only get a glimpse of the real person, which means that relationship is ultimately then based on deception. And any relationship that's based on deception is not going to be truly and deeply intimate, because intimacy is about being fully known. It won't be based on true love. And that's why the covenant is so important. In Homer's classic book, The Odyssey, what happens here is Odysseus, he's sailing on the sea. He knows that they're about to go past the mermaid, the women, the sirens, who sing this beautiful song out, and it causes sailors to go mad. They jump off the boat and swim out towards the mermaids, and they all die. All right, so he knows they're about to sail past these mermaids. He knows that the insanity that's going to come will be temporary, and as soon as he's out of earshot, his wits will return to himself. Now, so what does he do? He puts wax in all of his sailors' ears, and he ties himself to the mast because he still wants to hear it, but he doesn't want to go insane in that moment and jump off the boat and swim to his death. So he has the sailors tie him to the mast, and he tells them, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, do not untie me. No matter how much I beckon at you, come here, untie me. Don't do it. The point is, every single marriage is going to experience hearing the mermaid's call, the siren's call, that invites you to make a really bad lifelong decision, a permanent decision with permanent consequences. At some point in your marriage, that's going to happen. And that's where the contract doesn't help, but the covenant does. The covenant is binding yourself to the mast and saying, no matter how insane I get in a moment of anger, hurt, and frustration, I'm not going to jump off the boat. I'm going to protect myself and protect the marriage through this. Remember what we said last night? The one statistic I said to remember? It's this. 2/3 of unhappy marriages will become happy within 5 years if the couple stays married and doesn't divorce. This is why a covenant is so helpful and why a contract is so dangerous. Because every single marriage will experience the siren call that invites them to make a bad, lifelong, permanent decision. And that's where the covenant vow is so helpful. It keeps us tied to the mast until our mind clears and we can see and think clearly. But a consumer relationship won't do that. You're going to be completely driven by your passions, by your emotions, by your mood. And I have some moods where I'm like, I don't like anything. And even myself, we all have those days, right? And those are the days you don't want to make major lifelong decisions. Okay, now does this mean there's no grounds for ever leaving a marriage? No, I don't think the Bible teaches that. The Bible says that there are grounds for divorce. In Matthew 19:3, the Pharisees asked Jesus, they say, all right, Jesus, tell us, is it lawful or not for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? See, back then, you could divorce a guy could divorce his wife for any reason at all. If she burnt the bread, I'm done with you, get out, right? Like literally. I'm not exaggerating there, all right? But Jesus, he rejected that view outright. Here's what he said in Matthew 19. He says, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh? So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. They said to him, why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away? He said to them, because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, here's his grounds, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. All right, do you see what Jesus is doing here? He's quoting Genesis 2:24, which we just read, that marriage is a covenant. It's not a contract that can be just thrown out willy-nilly whenever you feel like it. If your wife burns the bread, you don't resort to divorce. His point is marriage is not a casual relationship that should be discarded easily. Instead, he says Moses permitted this because of the hardness of people's hearts. And so there are grounds for divorce like adultery. Now, that's not the only grounds. In 1 Corinthians 7, Paul adds that willful desertion, abandonment, is also grounds potentially for divorce. This doesn't mean you have to divorce in cases of adultery or desertion. It just means you're not locked in forever in those kinds of painful and awful situations. The Bible is clear. Allowing divorce for any reason is the opposite of what God created marriage to be. This is why divorce should not be easy. It's why it should not be our first, second, third, or even fourth resort to a marriage's problems. And yet, Jesus still understands the depths of human sin, so he does hold out hope for those who find themselves in marriage to somebody with a hard heart who has broken their covenant vows in those ways. Now, still, divorce is always terrible, and it should be, because the wronged party should not need to live in shame here. In fact, even God claims to have gone through a divorce in Jeremiah 3:8. He knows how painful it is. That's why it's so incredibly important for both parties in a marriage to view marriage as a covenant and not a contract, because things are going to change over time. And when they change for the worst, what do you need to have? You need to have yourself tied to the mast, or you will jump off. The Christian ethicist Lewis Smedes, he once said this: "When I married my wife, I had hardly a smidgen of sense of what I was getting into with her. How could I know how much she would change over 25 years? How could I know how much I would change? My wife has lived," this is funny, "my wife has lived with at least 5 different men since we were wed, and each of the 5 has been me." We change. It happens. We are different people over time. Now, what is the connecting link between who you are now and who you were back when you got married? Well, he says this: it's the promise. I promise to be he who will be there with you. That's the connecting link. It's the promise. It's the covenant. That's a beautiful thing. That's so much glorious than saying, instead of until death do us part, until inconvenience do us part. The fact is, life can be very inconvenient. And this inconvenience, it's going to show up in your marriage. It's going to happen at some point. And yet, our culture has bought the lie that covenants restrict our nature. They don't. They enhance it. They allow us to make decisions and stick with them. Think about this. If you live your life based on your feelings and whatever is convenient in the moment, do you actually have control of your life? No, your emotions do. None of us knows the future. None of us knows what hardship it will bring. We don't know how we're going to feel about anything down the road, because our feelings are like an emotional roller coaster. Up and down, back and forth. If who you are then is based on your ever-changing circumstances, which includes your feelings, who you are and where you end up is basically a roll of the dice. And who wants to leave your future to a dice roll? If you're controlled by feelings, your future will be completely determined by things that are almost entirely out of your control. That's why covenant promises aren't actually restricting. They free us to be able to be who we said we'd be. They free us to be, as Smedes rightly put it, the one who promised to be there with you. When you make a promise to someone and you keep it, as Smedes said, you have created a small sanctuary of trust within the jungle of unpredictability. That's what it does. Another thing here, when you first fall in love, you think that you love the person, but you don't. Not really. Sure, you have the feelings of love, but as we said, love is a verb. It's an action. It's not a romantic feeling. It leads to that, but that's not at its core essentially what it is. When we first fall in love, we are actually in love with a fantasized version of the person, not the real them, right? It's a fantasized version. And the truth is, it takes years for us to grow in our love for them, especially as you both begin to take your mask off and to show the real you to the other person, warts and all. This is why true love is coming to love the person despite their flaws. That's what it is. Tim Keller in the book, he says this: "To be loved but not known is comforting but superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and truly loved is, well, a lot like being loved by God. It is what we need more than anything. This liberates us from pretense, humbles us out of our self-righteousness, and fortifies us for any difficulty life can throw at us." Now think about it. Why on earth would we think that this kind of love would be devoid of romance and passion? Sure, you don't get the same buzz that you get when you were first dating 10 years into marriage, but if you think seriously about that buzz, where does that buzz come from? What's it based off of? It's based on feeling flattered. The idea that they are interested in us gives us this electric charge, and that goes right to our head, but not to our hearts. Versus when we serve each other for decades, when we don't feel like it, that goes right to the heart. Anyone who's been married a long time knows that holding your wife's hand now, your spouse's hand now, has much more electricity overall, though in a different way. It's a different kind of electricity than when you dated, but it's a much more deeper, real, lasting electricity. And you think about it, it makes sense why, because you have all this history of things you've gone through. Childbirth, kids, hardship, eventually loss of parents, right? All of these traumatic ordeals, all these beautiful, great moments in life, you have all of that together, and you've committed to be there for each other, and you have been there for each other. And that creates a more deep, lasting electricity than just the little buzz you get from, oh, they like me. All of the memories lead to this. They turn your love from a roller coaster ride into a more stable cruise ship-like experience, which I personally prefer more than a roller coaster any day of the week. At its core, true love is a desire for permanence, not temporary love. This is why when couples first fall in love, what do they almost start saying? What do they almost always start saying right away? They say things like, I will love you forever. I'll be there for you forever. I just love you, schmunky poo, you know? Like it just naturally comes out of us. Pookie poo, there you go. They almost never say things like if you watch these romance movies, which most of them I don't recommend, but they never say things, I promise to love you for a while. Doesn't happen, right? Because if somebody said that, the response would be like, gross, I don't want that. Because love is a desire for permanence. We all want somebody to commit to us forever. Instead of temporary commitment, we want somebody to commit to future love, not current love. That's what we're after. This is why a wedding should not primarily be a celebration about how much you currently feel love for the person. That's a given, right? If you're getting married, you feel love for the other person. Instead, a wedding is where you stand up before God, family, and society, and you make a promise, not of current love, but a promise of future love. And that's a beautiful thing. This is a really difficult thing for our culture because we've been taught to think that viewing love as a duty, as an obligation, is a bad thing. But the truth is, duty actually drives us to greater and deeper love. Think about that again, right? Like how often does a parent say to their child, I just don't feel in love with you anymore, so I'm going to drop you off at the orphanage or the foster home. I'm not feeling it anymore. Like that doesn't happen. Almost never. It's because as parents, why? We are forced to love our kids when we don't feel like it. In the middle of the night, moms, right? Like you're getting up to feed little Johnny, whether you feel like it or not. Because if you don't feed Johnny, he's going to die. That's how it is as parents. We're forced to love our children even when we don't feel like it. And as we continue to choose acts of love over time, what does it produce with our kids? Feelings of love that are unbreakable. And the same is to be true of marriage. It creates a loving, lasting, and unbreakable bond. But only if you choose to continually self-sacrificially serve the other, just like a parent does for their kids. If you adopt the Bible's mindset and willfully and deliberately engage in regular acts of love towards your spouse, it doesn't matter how lovely or unlovely they will be, over time, your love will snowball into a deeper, greater thing than it was at the start. That's how this works. When I was first married, I remember talking with a guy from our church, and he said something that absolutely shocked me. It just shocked me. I was in my mid-20s. He said that sex is better the longer you are married. And I'm like, gross, dude, you're almost 50. Because I was 20-something at the time, all right? But the truth is, if you ask any couple who has a good marriage and has been married for a while, they will confirm that. They will say, oh, that is absolutely true. And think about this. When it comes to the bedroom, we're going to get a little personal here, but it's in the Bible, we've got to talk about this. Not only, you think about when you're young and it comes to the bedroom, not only do you have no clue what you're doing when you're younger, you really don't, but It takes time to truly get to know your spouse and love them for who they truly are, not just for how they make you feel. Over time, you begin to understand their specific needs and how to meet them. And as this happens, you build a rich history of shared memories, deep emotional experiences, and connection that is extremely deep. And all of that is what drives your intimacy deeper. All of this serves to deepen and enrich in moments of romantic and sexual passion in your marriage. But you have to work to get there. You have to understand what the Bible means when it says to love your neighbor. Jesus says in Matthew 22, and he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So when Jesus tells us to love our neighbor, he's not saying we're to like our neighbor. All right? We don't have to like people that we love. And the reason he's saying to love your neighbor, not like your neighbor, is because you can only command action. You can't command feelings, right? How many of us can just control our feelings like that, like a light switch? None of us. Your feelings are fickle. And so when Jesus commands us to love our neighbors, he's saying, I'm calling you to action. That's what I'm calling to you. I'm calling you to act as if you feel like you love them. The fact is, our feelings are fickle. We all have days when we don't feel like being loving towards anyone, and sometimes that even includes ourselves. And yet we still choose to love ourselves by bathing, clothing, feeding, even when we don't feel like it. This is the kind of love that Jesus calls us to. Act loving towards others, regardless of how you currently feel in that moment. And that's exactly what Christ did for us, as we saw last night in the gospel. You know what is remarkable about all of this? Over time, acts of love produce feelings of love, as we just said. That's why almost no parent ever divorces their child. They love them unconditionally by serving them day in and day out, even when they don't feel like it. And if we do that in our marriage, our love will blossom. It'll flourish. This is what true love is. And feelings are not the measurement for true love. When I love someone based on my feelings, do you know what I'm really doing? Who am I serving? Serving myself, right? Because it's about my feelings. But if I love someone when I don't feel like it, I am completely serving the other person for their good, not for mine, which fits with Jesus' second great commandment. If I act loving to others when I don't feel like it, I am acting how Jesus did when he went to the cross for us. The danger of loving another person only when we feel like it is, as the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, we may not be loving the person so much as loving ourselves. That's profound. That's so true. In one of his BBC radio talks during World War II, C.S. Lewis, writer of Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, he explained what Christian love is. And as he did, he explained how the British people, they needed to love their enemies, which included the German people that they were currently having to fight. But this idea upset many of the listeners. This idea was gross and disgusting and repugnant to them. Why? Because of how evil and cruel the Germans had been. And they had been. But here's how Lewis responded. He said this: it would be quite wrong to think that the way to become charitable, or loving, is to sit and try to manufacture affectionate feelings. The rule for all of us is perfectly simple. Do not waste time bothering about whether you love your neighbor. Act as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love him. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking him more. If you do him a good turn, you will find yourself disliking him less. The worldly man treats certain people kindly because he likes them. The Christian, trying to treat everyone kindly, finds himself liking more and more people as he goes on, including people he could not even have imagined himself liking at the beginning. See what Lewis is saying here? He's saying that acts of love produce feelings of love. And so if you're struggling to feel loving towards somebody, what's the solution? act loving towards them, serve them, do kind things for their good. We need to take this seriously because the opposite is also true. If acts of love produce feelings of love, the opposite is also true. Lewis went on to explain, he said, this same spiritual law also works terribly in the opposite direction. The Germans, perhaps, at first, ill-treated the Jews because they hated them. Afterwards, they hated them much more because they had ill-treated them. The more cruel you are, the more you will hate, and the more you hate, the more cruel you will become. And so on in a vicious circle forever. In the book, Tim Keller talks about the first church he pastored. And it was a small rural church, I believe in Pennsylvania. And he explained that there was a couple in the church that were pretty prickly people. They weren't easy to be around. They constantly had relational problems. They struggled to keep friends. They were overall just a drain. You know people like this? Okay. But then something happened. He had been counseling with them for quite a while, and on one of Tim's days off, his wife said, hey, should we have somebody over tonight? What do you want to do? And he's like, yeah. And then he suggested that couple. And she was shocked. She's like, really? Them? That's going to be such a drain. That's going to be work. Tim thought about it for a second, and then he laughed, and he realized what had happened. He had actually come to like them, even though they weren't very likable. Not on their own. And why? It's because Lewis's principle is very true. Acts of love produce feelings of love. Acts of hatred produce feelings of hatred. And this had very little to do with how spiritual or holy Tim was. That's just the way things work. And I've been at this church almost 6 years now, I legitimately like everybody, even the ones that aren't that likable. Okay? Like, why? It's because it's my job to like them, to serve them, right? And as I serve people, then I find I legitimately like them. Keller says this, I had been loving them even when I didn't like them. And the result was slowly but surely, my emotions were catching up with my behavior. I love that. If you do not give up, but proceed to love the unlovely in a sustained way, they will eventually become lovely to you. Do you see how backwards our culture has this? It's totally backwards. It couldn't be any more wrong. Our culture tells us that feelings of love are the basis for actions of love, but they're not. The Bible tells us the exact opposite. Actions of love lead to feelings of love. Yes, feelings matter, okay? But you can't put the cart before the horse. It doesn't work. You can't put feelings first. You put acts of love first, and the feelings will finally catch up with you. This is why whenever I do marriage counseling, whenever I do marriage counseling, if they're having marriage problems, I will ask them and I will say, are you frequently spending time romantically together in the bedroom? And if they're having marriage problems, what do you think the answer to that question is? No. No. Often the husband, not always the husband, but usually, is the one who is frustrated by the lack of intimacy. And then I'll ask the wife, I'll say, well, why aren't you guys spending time in the bedroom? And the answer is predictable. It's because, she usually says, it's because why? What do you think she says? I don't feel close to him. I don't feel connected to my spouse. But do you see the problem here? Acts of love produce feelings of love every single time. And unloving acts produce feelings of unlovingness. So after explaining this to them, I then turn to 1 Corinthians 7, and here's what Paul says. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights. All right, that's bedroom talk. And likewise, the wife to her husband. Why? Because the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. All right, that sounds very jarring, but we got to keep reading. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement. All right, that's key, by agreement, for a limited time, so that you can devote yourself to prayer. But then come back together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Okay, so at this point then, let me back up. So whenever I do marriage counseling, I try to assign homework for them. And at At this point, I assign homework that at least usually the guy is very enthusiastic about. After reading this passage and explaining it, the homework I assign is very simple. I tell the husbands, you initiate sex once a week, and wife, you initiate sex once a week. Now, I'm not saying that's the maximum, right? But that's the minimum obligation here for your homework. But I also go on and I tell the husband to plan a date night once a month. Okay? Because we're not just trying to satisfy his desires, we're trying to address the root core problem, which is, hey, develop intimacy, right? It all has to go together. And you know what typically happens after assigning this homework for a few weeks? They come back and they're doing better. Shocker, right? Not always, not entirely. There's usually still problems, but it lifts the tension on the marriage that was there. Yeah, there's usually still serious problems that need to be worked on, but once the couple gets out of their own selfishness and starts serving the other for their good, the dynamics of the relationship begin to drastically change. The emotions start to follow slowly, sometimes, the behavior of love that they are engaging in. Now, as Keller points out, yes, we should not marry someone we don't like. All right, I'm not advising anyone to do that. But the truth is, whoever you marry, at some point, you will fall out of like with that person. Now, not out of love, but you will fall out of like with them, which means you cannot run a marriage on like. It's not stable enough to get you the distance. In any relationship, there will be difficult seasons where your feelings of love dry up. It's going to happen. And when that happens, what do you have to do? Tie yourself to the mast. Remember that the essence of marriage is covenant, commitment, and a promise to future love, not current love. When someone says, I don't need a piece of paper to show my love, you can rightly say, yes, you do. If you love in the way the Bible describes, you should have zero problems whatsoever making a legal, permanent, exclusive, lifelong commitment to that person. But sadly, many people never come to understand love in this way. It's because they've believed the culture's lies about marriage. As time goes on, we come to see our spouse's flaws, and we think, if they are not going to be the spouse they should be, then I don't have to be the spouse I should be. It's like tit for tat, right? We think that's fair. But it's not fair, is it? It's a form of revenge, is what it is. That's all it is. It's just pure revenge. But when both spouses do this, it results in things spiraling quickly. And sadly, it often results in one of the couples leaving the marriage because the original thrill wore off. So they move on to try to find that new thrill all over again with somebody new. They think that will solve it. Now, maybe you're thinking, I'm sorry, I can't give love when I don't feel like it. I just can't fake it. But Paul doesn't simply call us to do this without thought. He calls us to think as we act. Husbands, love your wives. How? As Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Do you see what Paul is saying here? He's pointing us to love how? What's the basis? What's the imagery he's given? Sacrificially, as Jesus did. That's the basis for it. He's saying love like Jesus loved. He's saying, husbands, love your wife and look at the cross as your reminder for how and why to do it. Do you think Jesus felt like going to the cross? You think he got up? Well, he didn't sleep the night before, but do you think as he went towards the cross, he's like, all right, yes, finally, let's do this? No, it was the exact opposite. He spent the whole night awake in the garden, praying, saying, Father, if it be your will, let this cup pass from me, with even sweat drops of blood. He didn't feel like it. He was in complete and utter agony on the cross as he died for us. He denied himself. He abandoned himself as others betrayed. He had denied himself. He denied his wishes as he was denied by those who followed him, abandoned by those who followed him, and betrayed by those who followed him. And yet, in the greatest act of love in all of human history, Christ stayed despite the fact that he didn't feel like staying. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's what our love is to look like in marriage. As Keller said, speak to your heart like that, and then fulfill the promise you made on your wedding day.